The screen door slams behind you and already you can hear it, that thin whine circling your ear in the dark. You slap your own neck and miss every time. By morning you are covered in bites you do not remember getting. Citronella candles burn down to nothing, and the mosquitoes barely notice. There is a plant that English cottage gardeners grew by every doorway for exactly this reason. It cost nothing. It needed no batteries, no plug, no refill. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I want to tell you where I first saw it growing, what I was told about it as a boy, and what is actually true about it now that we know more than our grandparents did. I was staying with my aunt in a village outside York one August. Must have been 9 or 10 years old. The evenings were warm, and the beck behind her cottage ran slow and still, which meant mosquitoes. Everyone else in that village seemed to be eaten alive sitting out in the evening. My aunt's garden was different. She had pots of a scraggly gray-green plant along the windowsills and either side of the back door. She called it her mosquito plant. I expected nothing from it. It looked like nothing, frankly, next to her roses. But I remember sitting out there past dusk, plates of bread and butter going round, and not getting bitten the way the other children did at the farm down the lane. That stuck with me. It was not proof of anything. Not really. It was just a boy noticing that one garden felt different to another. Years later, I went looking for what that plant actually was and what was really going on. What I found was a mixture of genuine old household wisdom and a few things that did not hold up nearly as well as I expected. I think that mixture is more interesting than a tidy story would be, so that is what I am going to give you. The plant my aunt grew was almost certainly what gardeners call a citronella geranium, sometimes sold as a mosquito plant, a scented pelargonium bred to smell strongly of citronella oil when its leaves are crushed or brushed against. It is not related to actual citronella grass at all. It is a pelargonium that was bred and marketed in the 20th century specifically because of that lemony citronella scent. Cottage gardeners took to it quickly because it was pretty, it was hardy in pots, and it smelled exactly like the candles people were already using. The belief was simple. If the smell repels mosquitoes in a candle, surely the living plant does the same thing, only better, only free. That belief spread through English gardens for decades. It is still repeated in gardening columns today. Here is where I have to be honest with you, because Arthur Whitfield does not deal in comfortable stories. Researchers have actually tested the citronella geranium itself, not just citronella oil in a lab bottle, by putting the living, undisturbed plant in a room with mosquitoes. Sitting quietly in a pot, doing nothing, the plant does not release enough of that oil into the air to do much repelling at all. The oil is sealed inside the leaf tissue. It only comes out in any quantity when the leaf is crushed, bruised, or rubbed. So the truth my aunt never knew was this. It was not the plant standing there in its pot, working some quiet magic on the evening air. It was almost certainly that she and everyone who brushed past it kept disturbing those leaves on the way in and out of the back door. Crush a few leaves between your fingers and rub the oil on your skin or your clothing. And for a short while, you do get a real, measurable repellent effect from the citronelle and geraniol in the leaf. That is genuine, and it has been demonstrated in proper tests. It just does not last the way the bottled stuff does, often less than an hour before it needs So the old method was not nonsense. It was simply misunderstood in one important detail, and that detail matters if you actually want it to work for you. The plant itself, untouched, will not clear your garden of mosquitoes. The leaf, crushed and rubbed on, genuinely will help for a while. Knowing that difference is the entire video. Now, let me give you the practical version. The one my aunt's generation stumbled onto by instinct rather than by reading the chemistry. You want a citronella-scented pelargonium, usually labeled Pelargonium citrusum, or simply sold under the common name mosquito plant, or citronella geranium at almost any garden center in Britain, the United States, or Australia. It likes full sun, well-drained soil, and a pot roughly 12 to 14 inches across if you are not putting it straight in the ground. A young plant in a French pot typically costs somewhere between 4 and 8 pounds in the UK, or about $5 to $10 in the US, depending on size. Plant it somewhere, you will actually brush past it, beside a door, along a path, near where you sit outside in the evening. That brushing is doing the real work, so position matters more than most gardening advice tells you. Before you go outside in the evening, take a few leaves, crush them firmly between your fingers, and rub the oil on your forearms, ankles, and the back of your neck. Do this again, roughly every 45 minutes to an hour if mosquitoes are bad, because the effect fades. One thing not to do: do not rely on potted plants alone, sitting around your patio expecting them to clear the air. That is the single biggest misunderstanding people have, and it is the reason so many gardeners feel let down by this plant and give up on it. The pleasant surprise is how easy the plant is to keep alive. It is forgiving of poor soil, tolerates light frost if brought indoors over winter, and a single plant can supply leaves all summer long. There is something fitting in that, because cottage gardeners across Yorkshire and Lancashire were doing exactly this kind of trial and error 2 centuries before anyone had isolated citronelle in a laboratory. Long before pelargoniums arrived from South Africa, English households were already using crushed herbs against biting insects, and one of the oldest and best documented is lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, which has grown in English gardens since at least the medieval period and was prized by herbalists for its strong lemon scent when bruised. It is genuinely a useful companion to the citronella geranium, because it works the same way, through crushed leaf oil rather than passive scent, and it is far hardier in the ground through a British winter. There is also catnip nepeta cataria, which English households grew mainly to please the cat, but which herbalists also rubbed on skin against midges and gnats. Modern laboratory work on nepetalactone, the compound that makes cats roll about in catnip, has actually shown it to be a genuinely effective mosquito repellent in controlled tests. In some studies performing comparably to standard repellent ingredients, though it has never been developed into a consumer product the way citronella has, that gives you 3 plants working on the same honest principle: citronella, geranium, lemon balm, and catnip, all needing to be crushed and applied rather than simply grown nearby. Long before any of these plants reached England, other cultures had already worked out the same underlying idea, that crushed aromatic leaves rubbed on skin could keep biting insects away. Ancient Egyptian households are recorded using crushed herbs and oils against insects along the Nile, where mosquitoes breeding in the floodwater made the problem constant. They were not chasing a pleasant garden scent. They were trying to survive the season, and they reached for the same Cruchandra method that English cottagers would arrive at independently more than 1,000 years later. Now, you might be sitting there with a balcony, no garden at all, no flower bed to plant anything in. You are probably thinking this entire video does not apply to you. Stay with me, because it does. Every plant I have mentioned does perfectly well in a small pot on a balcony or a windowsill, and the method does not change at all. Crush, rub, reapply. A single pot of lemon balm on a sunny windowsill gives you leaves all summer, regardless of how much outdoor space you actually have. If you want a second method that pairs naturally with crushed leaves, this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because English households did not stop at fresh leaves. They dried and infused them. Take a handful of lemon balm or citronella geranium leaves, dry them somewhere warm and shaded for about a week until they crumble easily. Then steep roughly 2 tablespoons of the dried leaf in a cup of a neutral oil such as sunflower or almond oil for around 2 weeks, shaking the jar daily before straining the leaf out through a cloth. What you are left with is an infused oil that holds the repellent compounds in a stable, ready-to-use form rather than needing fresh leaves crushed every hour. The total cost of doing this with leaves from your own pot is close to nothing beyond the oil itself, perhaps 2 to 4 pounds or $3 to $5. For the sunflower or almond oil, a small jar made this way will outlast a season of fresh crushing and gives you something to apply quickly without hunting for leaves in the dark. This same infusion method, oils carrying the active compound of a plant for longer use, was independently developed in ancient India, where neem oil was infused and applied against biting insects for many centuries. Valued for properties we now understand owe a great deal to a compound called as a combine a living citronella, geranium, or lemon balm by your door for fresh, crushed leaf in the moment, with a small jar of home-infused oil kept ready by the back door for evenings when you do not want to go hunting for leaves, and you have a complete low-cost system built entirely from things you grew yourself. I want to be honest with you about something from my own life, because I think it matters more than another instruction. For years, I bought aerosol insect repellent without a second thought, the same brand my father used, simply because it sat on the shelf at the chemist and nobody ever suggested looking past it. I must have spent a good few pounds a week across a long English summer without ever once questioning it. Nobody ever explained to me why the smell of citronella oil and citronella geraniums were not quite the same thing. Not the chemist, not the garden center staff who sold me my aunt's plants years later, not anyone. I had to go and find that out for myself, and I suspect most people never do. There is no grand villain in this story, no one I can point to and blame. It is simply a gap between an old household habit and the small piece of understanding that made it actually work. A gap that sat unfilled for generations because nobody thought it was worth filling in. You now know the difference between a plant sitting quietly in a pot and a leaf that has actually been crushed against your skin. That is the whole of it. A simple piece of knowledge, easily lost between one generation and the next, now sitting with you instead. Tell me something in the comments. How many mosquito bites did you wake up with this week, and where do you live? I am genuinely curious how bad this season has been from one garden to the next. And your numbers will help other people reading this understand whether it is just them. In the next video, I want to tell you about the Old English method for keeping a larder cold without any electricity at all. The kind of cellar and cold store thinking that fed entire households through the height of summer. There was a period in the 1950s when refrigerator manufacturers actively discouraged builders from including cold cellars in New English homes, treating them as an old-fashioned waste of floor space. They mostly succeeded, and most new houses since have been built without one. But the method itself was never lost, only set aside, and I think it is worth bringing back. If you do not want to be the last person on your street still relying on a fridge that hums all day and night, I will see you there.